We have a schedule, we have some details for preseason, but still plenty of questions that we have about the upcoming PWHL season.
This is the Women's Hockey Report presented by Locked On NHL. Your weekly look at the world of women's hockey. From the PWHL to the international stage, it's the Women's Hockey Report on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, welcome to another episode of the Women's Hockey Report. We come to you every Saturday on the Locked On NHL channel. My name is Erica L. Ayala, also your host of Locked On Kraken. I am alongside, as usual, Rachel Donner, who is your co-host not only of the Locked On Flyers show, but also our Friday edition of Locked On NHL. We are excited to talk all things PWHL and women's hockey on the Women's Hockey Report. If you're not already following the Locked On channel, go ahead and do that. And if you want specific curated content that is all about women's hockey, then make sure you head to TikTok for over at women's_hockey_report. Before we get into it, Rachel, let's let everyone know today's episode brought to you once again by our friends at FanDuel. You can download the FanDuel app now by visiting fanduel.com, and you can win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Okay, Rachel, so we have some things to talk about. We talked about the schedule. We are starting to get an idea of what the preseason is going to look like, but there's still plenty to do. We talked also a little bit about the news about maybe where the Takeover tour would go, and we have some signing news. I know, which is kind of crazy. We're this deep into the off season, which will almost be the preseason, but we're still getting signings, and we're going to go through all of that. But let's get after it. Preseason dates. So we started piecing this together, and I know we've talked about it a little bit as reports were coming out, and of course now the schedule is out, but we did see the teams officially announced dates when the players would arrive and also dates for media.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and we'll get into some of the issues around it, but we have training camp rosters coming out real soon on the 16th. So that's 5 days from now. We're going to at least get these initial training camp rosters. We'll see if there's any additional invited players that maybe we haven't been aware of in the past. So very exciting day to kind of kick off the preseason for the PWHL. Then we kind of jump to November 7th, where it's the first day for players to report to training camps, unless you are on a national team, because we know those camps are going on. So they don't have to report until Sunday, November 9th.
Yes. And this is something that's interesting because we talked about it last week, Rachel, but also it was officially announced between our last episode and this episode, official, that
Yes.
The IIHF schedule is changing to accommodate the PWHL schedule. And so, will we see this conflict when it comes to national team players in the future? Time will tell, because remember, the conflict is because of the takeover, the rivalry series.
Yes.
And but the rivalry series, the importance of it, as far as, yes, it's an exhibition, but we know we're going into the last several months before the Olympics. So these tune-ups are still important for the teams. But with the schedule changing, I do wonder if and how we'll see the PWHL schedule, or is everyone sticking to the PW schedule? Very interesting, especially as someone who is in the middle of covering the WNBA, and we're almost 30 years into that league. And I think all of the powers that be in women's basketball are still trying to figure out what we're holding as, the high card here, so to speak. But it's
the ideal calendar for the players, to be honest.
Exactly, which is important.
Exactly. And I think, it will be interesting to see what the future of the rivalry series is, if it's going to continue. Will they need the tune-ups if the IIHF starts providing these additional opportunities by moving worlds, by, we talked about there's a European tournament that is going to take place at a slightly different time of the year. Where is that going to fit in? I think there's a lot of questions that I think they are trying to punt until after the Olympics this year, and then get it sorted for starting next PWHL season.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's promising, though, that the landscape, again, just coming from covering the W, still coming from. I'm still in the middle of it. We've got a game tonight, game 4. But I think it's interesting to see that we're already seeing the landscape shift, and that's where women's hockey, because it there's a little bit more room to be nimble.
Yeah.
The PWHL obviously has really put some ducks in a row, and there seems to be at least communication, if not a confidence that we maybe haven't seen in the past. So we have a lot of other questions more specific to the PWHL, but since we were talking about that specific national team nugget, I thought it was a good time to just chime in there and recycle or return back to some things that we had talked about before. So, okay. So we know when the players are arriving. We know when the national team players are arriving, Rachel, but we also got, a better understanding of when the, when we'll have, of course, the on ice practices, because there's always some things that happen before.
There's physicals, there's media day, all of that.
Exactly. So we have that schedule, as well as when media will be invited to these. And so, we're seeing that the first full on ice practices will happen actually a month from roughly, today's technically the 11th, Saturday the 11th. But, November 10th, first full on ice practices. Now, I'm imagining there might be some things that happen that we see in the NHL. Again, you and I just came from covering preseason and training camp for our respective NHL teams that we cover for Locked On, like captains practices, or in the case of the NHL, guys just kind of getting workouts in. I would imagine and hope, especially for some of the teams like we've talked about, Vancouver, or
everybody's team was turned upside down, right?
Yeah, well, I was not thinking about that. I was thinking about facilities. I was thinking about teams that have facilities where they are the main tenant, or at least, they have access to facilities. And that was another big thing with the PWHL, right? Is that to kind of get these teams to have their practice spaces and facilities in ways perhaps that we haven't seen in the past. So first full on ice practices and in-person media for Boston, Minnesota, Ottawa, and Vancouver are going to be on the 10th. Then we have the rest of the team on the 11th and 12th, New York, Seattle, Toronto on the 11th, and then Montreal. I don't know. I'm Spanish or Latin. What do you want from me? On Wednesday, November 12th. So really that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. If you are a national writer, good luck getting to all the cities. But I think this is obviously more for local media, usually more for local media. But there was also something, it didn't really go reported, but similarly to what we see for the NHL, where the league itself hosts a media day and then they invite specific players from each team. Just from peeping the social media, we did have some of that. So and that's for promo stuff, right? So we did have a little bit of that. But another thing, Rachel, that we want to talk about is that we also have a scrimmage schedule.
Yeah, so it is really interesting in terms of where this league is, in terms of maturity and years into it, and what the preseason looks like with these scrimmages, because each team is going to get 2 scrimmages. They're going to be held in one city for those scrimmages. So it's like either a home game or an away game for both of the teams. All of the teams or the host teams are going to play in their regular arena, except for the New York Sirens, who are going to be playing in a different rink in West Orange, New Jersey. And, I think it's good to have a couple of tune-ups. There's a question as to, are 2 preseason games enough? I think, what the NHL does with 6 or 7 is too many, but is 2 games too few to get to a final roster when you're trying to make those decisions between a practice squad and the main squad.
Yeah, I think it's about balance, because, I think, maybe you can say that the preseason games for the NHL are too long, but also there's not really a lot of time for like a camp proper before those games. And so, if you're a brand new team, I have covered an expansion team, right? And I'm about to cover one again in Seattle. I would imagine that having practices even before scrimmages is probably an important thing, because you don't have systems to go off of. Everybody's brand new. And so how much time can you really utilize if you don't have proper practices before these games to even do evaluation? Because basically you're just going out there and being like, all right, everyone do your best. but that goes back to refining a team. Is someone who's maybe an invite, who's trying to make a team, does that give them the best chance to show off what they can do in a system if the system hasn't even been established yet? So it goes back and forth.
Excellent questions, right?
Yeah. But, all things that it's kind of like building this plane as we're going in a lot of ways. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's real. That's what's happening.
Right. And I think there's also a question of the formality of the preseason, right? So for the NHL preseason, as we know, all of the games are public. Fans are able to attend and purchase tickets. And, there's a mixed bag in terms of whether or not the games are broadcast or whether they're streaming, but all of the games are open to the public. In the PWHL's case, as of yet, they have had no open to the public preseason games, and no chance to get to know your new players ahead of the season. No chance, I think there's an understandable side to it from the business side in terms of operating a rink with all the costs and all the operational issues that you need. I understand that. And so I think there's something to that, but also, are we at a point yet where they should be accounting for that and budgeting for that? I think it's a valid question.
Right. And, I hear what you're saying. And maybe that's a concern maybe for some arenas and areas, but these venues are already open to them, right, for practices. Some of them are shared with teams that are already up and running. So is it about budget? Is it about schedule? Is it just something that wasn't high on the priority list? Maybe these are questions we're going to have to ask Jana Hefford or someone, because you want to see it be as close to, and yes, the NHL is the most reasonable comp because it's the same sport, but also we see this, again, using the WNBA as an example, for whatever reason, the league saw value once Caitlin Clark came into the league to start more regularly broadcasting specifically Indiana preseason games, even though those were things that individual teams had been asking for, and some have had the capability to do prior to. So I don't think you need to wait for your quote unquote Caitlin Clark if you're the PWHL. I think you need to do what makes sense in the overall sports landscape. Sometimes thinking holistically about sports, and sometimes thinking specifically about hockey, sometimes thinking specifically about women's sports.
Correct. And I think the other aspect of it is, as I've talked to, NHL broadcasters, they use the preseason to practice themselves, right? The broadcasters need a tune-up. Operations needs a tune-up. The broadcast, technical side of things needs a tune-up. The building needs a tune-up, especially for the expansion teams, right? They have to learn how to execute on a game operations plan for the PWHL. So it's not just for the players, it's for the league as a whole to have a full preseason.
Agreed. So maybe this is something that we'll see change in the future, but as it stands right now, as you mentioned, we have what the schedule will be from the 13th. So I mentioned those really the media days and the first open full practices are just 3 days for some of these teams, removed from their first scrimmages. And there's not a lot of scrimmages. Not everyone gets a home scrimmage, but those will run from November 13th, where we see the 13th and 14th, Minnesota and New York. The 15th, we see Boston versus Montreal, as well as Seattle, Vancouver. The 16th, we see Seattle, Vancouver again, and then Toronto, Ottawa on the 16th and 17th. And then Boston, Montreal, actually, they have a day in between. So everyone else is stacked, back to back, except for Boston, Montreal. And is that better for Boston, Montreal? Is that better for the teams that go back to back? All of these questions. But, I guess it depends on how your franchise is utilizing these games. Are they really just to get more game fit, or are you able to execute certain things? And some of that, I think, depends on if you are an established team, but not only that, because, we have the 6 teams that are original to the PWHL. So they have their rosters together. But, again, it goes back to how much can you use these to really refine your roster. So again, is it enough of a tune-up? Should there be, something more formal? How is this impacting the fan aspect? Or is there an opportunity for the league to make even more money? And, we are still a capitalist society, a democracy. I mean, we've been far from that, but anyway, that's another podcast for another day. But, I think that these are all questions, but not the only questions, Rachel, right, that we have. So coming up next on the Women's Hockey Report on the Locked On NHL channel, we're going to get into some other most pressing questions that we have ahead of the puck drop for season 3. Some are league specific, some are more team specific, but we are going to ask those questions. Will we have answers? Maybe not, but we definitely have opinions. So stay tuned for that.
The NFL season is in full swing, and the NHL has finally dropped the puck, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I like using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet, whether it's player props, building a same game parlay, or even jumping in live as games are unfolding. It's quick, easy, and the best way to add a little more energy to your game watching experience. On the NFL side, you can take my Locked On Flyers co-host opinion here and bet on the New York Jets to have the worst season record in the NFL. Or you can make that Stanley Cup final pick here, whether you think the Edmonton Oilers can finally get there and actually win one. We'll see. So are you ready to play? You can download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place that first $5 bet.
All right. Thank you, as always, for making us a part of your Saturday listen here at the Women's Hockey Report. Rachel Donner is here. I am Erica L. Ayala. And we gave you a little bit of a rundown of the preseason, including some specific preseason questions and maybe some opportunities talking about other leagues, including the NHL, the WNBA. But now, what are some questions that we have specific to the PWHL, Rachel? What is still pending on that whiteboard to-do list?
Yeah, it's so weird because each time we get like a main announcement, right? So the last time it was the schedule. This time we get a more formal preseason rundown, right? That we just talked about. And I think like the big question, are we going to get team names for Seattle and Vancouver, or are they just going city names a la Utah in the NHL for their first year? And it's looking more and more like that. But again, we don't know. Totally in the dark about this. And I just think it's a really interesting approach because as we're getting closer and you want to have jersey sales, and these players, honestly, on those teams are maybe, losing out on revenue opportunities here by delaying this in some ways. Who wants to buy a Hillary Knight jersey, right?
Literally everybody, right?
Uh-huh.
I think that last point I want to stick with for a little bit because that's a really big point, because we've talked about the collective bargaining agreement, the CBA, things that we like about it, how it's made history, and the things that are still quite honestly pending. But one of the things I remember speaking to Sarah Nurse now with Vancouver, the name to be named, with the Vancouver team, is that they wanted NIL to be baked in immediately, and they wanted players to be able to make money off of their name, image, and likeness. Now, some of that has just gone through how they've done things like having agents, which I have some questions about how they've structured that. I don't know that it really is an open market for all players, but again, we can talk about that on another episode. But to your point, when you don't have jerseys that you're able to sell with players' names on it, or jerseys that people are going to want to buy because for Vancouver and Seattle, before they know the name is going to change, because it's inevitable that's going to change. I mean, you talked about Utah, but we had the entire league. We had 6 teams that did that in the first season. I thought it was ridiculous, and then the NHL was like, I guess we'll do that too. And I'm like, come on, man, just give us a name. But I think that's it's just, again, one of those things where we don't have complete insight. And since it's a single entity, these are things that are going to be rolled out as a league and not necessarily things that teams can do on their own. But I do want to return, and we might have to have Ava Wood or 365 Hockey girl up again on this, because if I'm not mistaken, I was at the season ticket holder event for PWHL Seattle, and my understanding and some of the language that was used is that there is a name that is at least maybe in the final, works or process. I mean, again, we saw that with the first 6 teams. Some names were floated out there, and some of them stuck, some of them didn't. But it sounds like there's at least a logo that they're thinking about, that they have in mind. So does that mean that they have to wait? Do they have to wait for Vancouver, or can they do that on their own? Is that something that the league makes a decision on? But, we kind of got a tease, because it was like, oh, they were giving away a hat and had the PWHL Seattle. And then they were like, oh, LOL, like, it'd be cool to win this because pretty soon it's going to become a collector's item. Yeah. Exactly. So I think that's interesting. I also do, speaking of Ava, who's been on the program a few times now, I think she did a great job talking about, the Day of Truth and Reconciliation, specifically in Canada, of course, although the United States should not separate itself from that history. But anyway, again, maybe a conversation for another podcast on another day. But she mentioned the idea of, the specific schools and their relation to the royal system, right, of England, and having a queen, and thinking of Queen Victoria and all of that stuff, and a lot of that assimilation. Those were basically what those schools were. The residency schools were about right. Assimilation. And she brought up a question that honestly I never really thought of, so that's on me. But is that scepters and that history specifically to Queen Victoria, is that maybe not taking fully into consideration, again, the history and the work that places like Canada have been doing to honor, what was a very sordid, very violent history, and thinking of the truth and reconciliation of Native and Indigenous communities. I don't know. I know we didn't have this specifically on our rundown, but as we were talking about logos and names, I just remembered that Ava had done that on her social media.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely something that should be taken into consideration when choosing these names. And I know, like, Pacific Northwest is a location in general, so this affects Seattle and Vancouver, of like treading lightly when picking team names, when picking logos for those teams. And I know, obviously in the US with men's sports, there's been several team name changes over the last while. And I think that, women's sports has uniquely been able to position itself in a way that does take these things into consideration, as a general rule, a little bit better than the men's side of sports. So I certainly hope that is part of the process.
Yeah. Also, the word I was looking for that I couldn't quite reach was monarchy. I was like, there's a word for that. And I was like, it's not coming to me. But yeah, anyway, so something to keep in mind. Again, Ava does great work. I love that she can go from, the Tim Hortons and Barbie collection to, again, having deeper conversations. But that was kind of her whole point and you just said it as well, Rachel, right? In theory, women's teams have had more time to grapple with this as we as a collective society have these conversations more openly. But that doesn't mean there hasn't been backstepping. And so is that something that Toronto needs to do? Let us know in the comments. I'd really love to hear from people, especially from Canada. I'm not from there, and so I don't want to misspeak or misinterpret or misunderstand the conversation that's happening. So let us know what you think. But again, other questions that we still have, playoff format. This is a big one, and I know you and Pascal have been sending notes back and forth.
Oh, listen, just the fact that he talked about it was a big deal. And if you haven't heard last week's show, go take a look that he ran down with me in a conversation after the Culty signing presser about what he wanted to see from the playoff format. But yeah, I think you can't legitimately start the season without a playoff format, because teams have to know how they're approaching their seasons to try and get in the playoffs and find success. So, they've got like a month to figure it out.
Yeah. Playoff format is a huge thing. I think also fans want to know, right? Because we do know one thing we have data on is that women's sports fans travel because they're used to only having a handful of teams, and picking a team that might not have anything to do with their zip code and where they live, where they work, but maybe they were in college and that was the team or their favorite player, whatever the case is. But women's sports fans travel, and knowing as far ahead as far enough in advance as humanly possible, I think is always a great way to honor and respect the fans, but also to sell those tickets. Like, let's do it, So I think that's something interesting. We'll see what the playoff format has. Will they send it to, will there be a fan vote on the playoff format? Please no. I mean, that's a joke. Don't do that. Just go ahead and announce it. And then Takeover tour. We have done some sleuthing, including on last episode, Rachel, putting together the pockets of information that we have now with the schedule, as you said, being announced. We've done some more sleuthing, but that's still not something that has been announced.
No, it has not. And, I expected that to be delayed a little bit. So I'm not mad about it at the moment. But that being said, with the aforementioned point you made about travel, if people are interested in traveling to see their home team play in the third market city, you need lead time to plan those things. And if people need to hold dates on their calendars in the Takeover tour cities, especially given all the social and sports opportunities you have, I want to know what those dates are. I got to plan around it.
I'm telling you, and people might make plans to do other things. Again, it's an Olympic year. And these are things that people travel for because the dates are known in advance, and you don't want to miss out on the opportunity, again, to have your loyal fans, to have a good showing for your players. And again, all of these are money makers. I know they cost money, but they make you money in theory, or at least they should, right? So these are some of the questions, but let us know in the comments or over again at women's_hockey_report on the Tiki Talk. What are some of your most pressing questions for the PWHL as we get ready to drop the puck on season 3? But some questions that we did get answered, Rachel. That comes with some signing news. We'll get into that on the other side of this quick break. All right. We did get some signings. I know you were able to, we talked about it on the last episode, go to one of the official press conferences and intros that we talked about. Aaliyah Fashnell has done a great job on social media and just some hilarious content there. But we also have some other names and some other players that have officially put pen to paper or finger to screen, whatever the case is these days, however people sign contracts. So let's run through that, Rachel.
Yeah, I was a little worried about Montreal, not going to lie, because they hadn't really been signing their draft picks. But Nicole Gosling is officially signed a 3-year deal with the Victoire. She was the 4th overall pick in this past year's draft. As we know, an excellent defender. She won gold with Canada in the 2024 Worlds. If the name sounds familiar and you weren't around for the draft, she is Julia's cousin who plays on Seattle. So that's kind of fun there. But, she was on the top pairing at Clarkson, ironically with Haley Wynn, who went 2nd overall in the draft. So that's a hell of a defensive pairing for Clarkson that, went in the first round of the PWHL draft. Now they're
Clarkson
on separate.
Had a great draft.
They did.
Yeah.
They did. So, I think that she'll probably end up on the 2nd pairing with Montreal there, but so much experience and leadership and success to bring to Montreal, which I think that'll be really exciting. She was the captain of Clarkson this past year and had 39 points in 40 games, which, for a defender, again, really strong offensive game Nicole has. So very, very excited to see her get going.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe one of those players that when we have our deep dive, we're going to have to invite Allison Lucan on. So you two,
oh my God, yes.
I will just moderate the positionless hockey conversation.
Rovers. We love all Rovers.
And you will both make me very uncomfortable. And I'm like, oh, positionless. I guess this is the theme. This is the trend we're seeing in sports. I just had a positionless conversation in NCAA basketball. USC Trojans. Yeah, they're going positionless, folks. You heard it here first. But yeah, and maybe they need to with no Juju Watkins. So there you go. But I think that would be a really fun conversation. Honestly, we should get that in the works. I'll put in an ask to the ever busy but oh so pleasant and insightful Allison Lucan. You can also listen to Too Many Men podcast. Shout out, love what the trio over there is able to do. Yes, indeed. Okay, but not the only signing. Michelle Karvinen also officially puts puts the contract in with PWHL Vancouver from Finland. We've talked about this is a veteran coming over, goes, in the draft because, again, that's just where women's hockey is. I think that's more of a thing. They probably could have just signed her as a free agent. And, why not make some fanfare over, again,
anybody over 30 can just sign as a free agent. I think that should have been the way to go, but she was in the draft. So. She
was in the draft. That's what we're doing now. And I think that has roots in CWHL. We've seen that before. I think the NWHL, specifically more in their PHF days, we're trying to get to it being a true entry draft. So again, maybe that's another question we have to add to our long list, Rachel. Should it just be an entry draft for true rookies? Is there a special process that's not called free agency that should happen for veterans making the move? All questions that we'll talk about eventually, I'm sure. But you think second line for Karvinen, and I know we did this on our deep dive, but for folks who maybe haven't yet, go check it out, haven't yet listened to that, what makes you think that Karvinen is a good fit for that second line for Vancouver?
Yeah, I think you just look at the potential top line for Vancouver, and that's Sarah Nurse, Michaela Cava, and Jennifer Gardner likely. And that's hard to crack, especially when you're older, right? And maybe a little slower. I think, she's still
Michelle's
excellent.
Coming for you.
Listen, it just kind of happens, right? There's it's not a bad thing because she still has the skill to be a second liner. And I think it'll work well with potentially Hannah Miller and Venisheva. I think that's a really good line there. And that's a
solid line.
That's a great 1-2 punch for your top 6 there. And so I would not sneeze at it. And it isn't by no means an insult. I think that's just the right mix on those lines.
And it becomes okay, yes, I guess one line is listed above the other, but what's really your top line? Does the matchup matter? Does it? And you can have your top line, but maybe again, situationally, maybe you're dealing with injuries, you run one line more than another because you like your matchups or whatever the case is. So we kind of use this terminology in hockey, and I think it does satisfy what we do in media, right? To have these conversations, who's getting top 6 minutes, who's getting bottom 6 minutes. But honestly, you got to do whatever you got to do to win. But again, like you said, that if that's your top line, okay, then your second line is a top line in a lot of other places, so it's a good problem to have. But I know we've talked about it on the show. I really love what Vancouver is doing overall, so not surprising there. But it will be fun to see, as I know you agree, just to see what that's going to look like. All right, the Sirens, wee woo, ? As Toronto says, also as Erica says sometimes. But they did not leave any question when it came to signing one of their draft picks.
Yeah, a little further down the list for them was Dale Ross, who's a defender from St. Cloud State. But I think, obviously you need depth signings, and that's good. And she got a 1-year deal, which is probably right for a lower round pick, because you're kind of taking a gander here. I think she's borderline to make the top 6 to start the season. I think she'll make the roster. How much playing time she'll get to start off with, I think, is a question, and they'll try and ease her in there, probably with some third pairing time.
Yeah, we will see what happens there. And then, this is a player that we've talked about for best times, definitely someone that, including in postseason run, will get some PIMs, all right, penalty minutes for sure. And that's Britta Curl is extended in Minnesota.
Yeah, and I think that was natural that it was going to happen there. She's been a huge part of that team, and they have dedicated a portion of their lineup to her, as she was protected by them during the expansion process, I believe in the 4th protection slot that the Frost had. So I think it was just a matter of time before the extension happened.
Yeah, 100%. Again, someone who has some storylines that follow that are not strictly speaking hockey related. So always a little dust up when Britta Curl's name comes up. And again, not a huge surprise here for all of the reasons that you mentioned. So that pretty much wraps what we know, at least as ever at the time of our recording. So naturally more news will drop before you watch this. But I think that we're starting to chug along. I, for one, am excited, and I hope we see a little bit more transparency and, again, forward thinking when it comes to the teams inviting us to these media days. I got to go to the first ever Sirens Media Day. Or was it still PWHL New York? Now I'm questioning all things that I know. I think it might have been season 1. But either way, I know that New York had a really big media day. Just in speaking to the people who were there at the time, they really had a great budget for that, which I think people were wondering, is this what we really need to do? And my answer is yes, it is. We know how important in-house media is, and we're seeing that leagues, including the NHL, are really investing there. And so it's something that I want to see the PWHL do as well. But a part of that is also inviting media members to do that, so that you are not, I think there's so many unique voices have always been in women's hockey, and opening up the fields to some of us to be able to bring our own spin to that coverage, I think is going to be huge. So it's something that I hope, again, for some of us who are covering other hockey leagues, whether it's NCAA or for us both, men's hockey as well, making sure that you show some love to media, because we want to be able to share that with our audience as well, in service of telling the stories of the athletes and of the league itself, the sport. So we'll see. But that's what we know. what we don't know and what we think about what we don't know as far as our opinions. But we're going to wrap it here, Rachel. And then next week we'll be 1 week closer again. We'll reach out and hopefully hear a little bit more about what these teams have planned as far as being able to engage with the media and being able to share some of these stories of these athletes even ahead of some of these scrimmages and the preseason. But for Rachel Donner, I am Erica L. Ayala. If you're not already subscribed, please do subscribe on YouTube. Again, if you want specific curated content, which will be shorts, small clips from our episodes, but also some bonus content that we have, make sure you're following women's_hockey_report. Stick taps to Joe Dabney, who helps curate that for us. We've got some fun things in the works. And of course, you can follow Rachel and I, both of us, on Blue Sky for sure, and you can also find us elsewhere. But until next week, again, send us your comments. What do you think about the preseason? What should and shouldn't happen in the future? Are there some burning questions that you have that we can talk about next episode? Or you just want to say hi, give us your opinions? That's fine too. We'll take it all. For Rachel Donner, I'm Erica L. Ayala, and we will catch you next week, Saturday. Enjoy your weekend, everybody.